Have you ever wondered why we prefer slippers over shoes as we age? Let me share with you 6 reasons why I decided to hang up my shoes. Over time, I realized that the things that once brought me joy no longer held the same appeal. When I was younger, I loved visiting friends and family, attending gatherings and staying socially active. I used to believe that the busier I was with social activities, the more meaningful my life would feel. But as the years went by, I started to notice something. After every visit, instead of feeling energized, I felt exhausted. At first, I questioned myself. Am I isolating myself? Am I losing important relationships? But then I came to understand that this wasn't a sign of loneliness. It was a natural change. It was a shift toward wanting a slower, more peaceful life, where I prioritized my well-being over social obligations. I no longer felt the need to be everywhere or engage in conversations that didn't truly bring me joy. And I realized that's completely okay. Here are the reasons why I decided to visit less frequently and instead embrace life in a way that truly makes me happy. 1. The too many stairs. Saga. When I was younger, visiting friends never felt like a challenge. I could walk long distances, climb stairs, and sit for hours chatting without feeling the slightest bit tired. But now, at 75, my body has started to protest against things I once considered normal. I remember visiting an old friend, Janet, after she moved into her new house. It was a beautiful, spacious home, but there was one problem I hadn't anticipated: the stairs. When Janet excitedly invited me on a tour of the house, I didn't have the heart to refuse. At first, I thought climbing a few steps wouldn't be a big deal, but after just a few, my heart started racing. By the time we reached the second floor, I had to pause, gripping the handrail to catch my breath. Janet, still full of energy, continued leading the way, while I felt like I had just climbed a mountain. By the time I finally sat down, I realized something. My body wasn't the same as it used to be. After that visit, I started rethinking my social outings. They weren't always as effortless as they used to be. Sometimes it was the long walk from the parking lot, or sitting for hours on an uncomfortable chair that left my back aching. Some houses just weren't suited for my health anymore: steep staircases, stiff seating, or nowhere to rest when I needed to. And when I got home from these visits, instead of feeling happy and refreshed, I felt completely drained. I slowly came to understand that it wasn't that I didn't want to see my friends, it was that my body no longer agreed with long trips or extended gatherings. I started prioritizing my own comfort. If someone wanted to meet up, I would suggest they visit me instead, or we could meet at a nearby cafe, somewhere without stairs or exhausting travel. In the end, I learned that there's nothing wrong with listening to my body and adjusting the way I socialize. I don't have to push myself to exhaustion just to maintain old habits. I can still keep in touch with the people who matter, but in a way that better suits my needs. 2. The tea that wasn't tea incident. I used to love lively conversations with friends and neighbors. Discussions about everything: work, family, and the latest news always brought excitement. I believed that socializing was an essential part of life, keeping me connected and making me feel like I was still an active part of the world. But over time, I realized that not every conversation brought joy, and sometimes silence was something I valued even more. I remember visiting an old friend whom I hadn't seen in years. I was looking forward to a pleasant chat, reminiscing about old times, but as soon as we sat down, I noticed that our conversation wasn't the same as it used to be. Instead of sharing interesting stories about life, the conversation slowly drifted into topics that felt heavy and draining. My friend started talking about distant relatives I barely remembered, then moved on to complaining about everything, from the weather and rising prices to personal health struggles. I tried to stay engaged, but the more I listened, the more exhausted I felt. It wasn't just the negativity that drained me. I also found myself struggling to keep up with certain conversations. Younger family members would talk about new technology, trends, and social media platforms I had never heard of. They discussed movies, apps, and gadgets that I didn't know how to use. I would sit there, nodding along, trying to keep up. But deep down, I knew the gap between us was growing. After experiencing this repeatedly, I started asking myself, do I really need to participate in every conversation? Is constant chatter always beneficial, or is there a kind of peace that comes from silence? I realized that instead of forcing myself into conversations that no longer interested me, I could spend my time on things that truly mattered, reading a good book, enjoying a quiet morning, or simply listening to my own thoughts. I'm not saying I avoid conversations altogether, but I've learned to be more selective. I choose to talk with people who make me feel comfortable, who bring warmth and meaningful connection rather than empty words. And since making that choice, I've felt more at peace than ever before. 3. The who's got time for gossip decision. I used to look forward to visiting friends and family. Every visit felt like an opportunity to connect, to catch up, and to nurture relationships. I believed that maintaining these visits was an essential part of life, a way to show care and preserve bonds. But over time, I realized that not every visit was truly necessary, and sometimes they brought more pressure than joy. There were times when I visited someone simply because I felt like I had to. They had visited me before, so I thought it was only polite to return the favor. But instead of enjoying a meaningful conversation, I found myself sitting there, trying to sustain a forced dialogue, feeling no real enthusiasm. I would listen to stories that didn't interest me, answer the same routine small-talk questions, and sometimes I would catch myself watching the clock, silently hoping the visit would end sooner so I could go home. More than that, I started to notice that many visits felt more like an obligation rather than a natural, enjoyable gathering. There were invitations I accepted even when I was already exhausted, just because I didn't want to disappoint anyone. I feared that if I declined, they would assume I no longer cared. But as time went on, I realized that I simply didn't have the energy to keep up with these unnecessary visits. One particular evening, after a long day of visiting multiple people, I came home completely drained. My body ached, my mind felt heavy, and I asked myself, why am I doing this if it doesn't bring me joy? That was the moment I knew something had to change. I didn't want visiting others to feel like a chore. I wanted my visits to be meaningful moments, times when I could truly enjoy the company of those I cared about without feeling burdened by social obligations. So I started being more selective. I chose to visit only the people I genuinely wanted to see, the ones whose company made me feel comfortable and happy. I no longer felt guilty about declining invitations that I knew would leave me feeling exhausted. And surprisingly, when I focused on making my visits intentional and meaningful, I found that I appreciated those moments even more. The time I spent with loved ones became richer, deeper, and truly worth treasuring. The every visit becomes a sleepover problem. I love conversations. Every meeting brings new stories, fresh perspectives, and moments of laughter. I could spend hours chatting with friends, discussing current events, sharing memories, or even debating exciting topics that spark curiosity. But as I've reached 75, I've realized that not every conversation brings the same joy it once did. There have been times when I visited someone, yet instead of feeling engaged, I simply sat there, nodding and smiling out of politeness. The same old stories I had heard hundreds of times, the endless complaints about aging and health, or conversations filled with negativity, left me feeling emotionally drained. I started asking myself, do I really want to spend my time on these conversations? One particular visit made me truly recognize this change. I went to see an old friend, someone I had once shared endless conversations with, never running out of things to say. But that day, our conversation was different. Instead of discussing interesting topics, he went on and on about family troubles and complaints about society. I listened for a while, but the more I heard, the more exhausted I felt. I no longer wanted to immerse myself in discussions that drained my energy rather than uplifted it. Beyond that, I also noticed the growing distance between myself and the younger generation. I used to enjoy listening to my grandchildren's stories, but now many of their conversations feel like they come from an entirely different world. Discussions about technology, social media, and the latest trends, all of it seems foreign to me. I try to listen, I try to understand, but I just can't connect with them as naturally as I once did. After many such moments, I came to understand that not every conversation needs to continue. I no longer feel obligated to engage in discussions out of mere politeness or fear of being judged. Instead, I've become more selective, choosing to talk with people who bring me comfort and discussing topics that truly interest me. I now cherish simple, meaningful conversations, ones where I don't have to force myself to keep the dialogue going. And I've realized that the quality of a conversation matters far more than its quantity. 5. The out-of-date small talk dilemma. There was a time when visiting friends and family for hours, or even staying overnight, felt like a joyful and natural part of life. Endless conversations, intimate meals, and laughter-filled gatherings made time fly by. I used to believe that the longer I stayed, the more meaningful the connection. But now, at 75, those long visits leave me feeling more drained than delighted. And for a while, that realization filled me with fear. At first, I struggled to understand what was happening. Why did something that used to bring me joy now feel exhausting? Was I becoming antisocial? Was I losing my ability to connect with people? I feared that if I started declining invitations or shortening my visits, people would think I no longer cared. Would my friends and family start seeing me as distant? Would they stop inviting me altogether? I remember one visit in particular that made me face this fear head-on. I had planned to stop by an old friend's house for a quick tea break and a short chat before heading home. But my friend, ever the gracious host, kept encouraging me to stay longer. "One more cup of tea?" she asked, smiling. I hesitated but didn't want to seem rude, so I agreed. Then came dinner, and I didn't have the heart to decline. And just as I was preparing to leave, she insisted, "It's late. Why don't you just stay the night?" In that moment, I felt trapped. I didn't want to offend her, but deep inside I longed for my own bed, my familiar evening routine, my quiet space. My chest tightened as a wave of discomfort washed over me. Would she be upset if I left? Would she think I didn't enjoy our time together? I smiled, nodded, and before I knew it, what was meant to be a brief visit had turned into an unplanned overnight stay. That night, lying in a guest bed that wasn't mine, I stared at the ceiling, feeling restless. I realized that I wasn't just physically uncomfortable, I was mentally exhausted. I had lost control over my own time, and it unsettled me. In the morning, I went through the motions of polite conversation and an extended breakfast before finally making my way home, drained and longing for solitude. That experience forced me to confront an important truth. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate my friends or enjoy their company. I did. But I had become accustomed to my own rhythm, my own space. I liked returning home at the end of the day, sleeping in my own bed, and waking up to my familiar morning routine. When a visit stretched beyond what I had planned, I felt uneasy, like I was losing a sense of control over my life. On top of that, extended visits took a physical toll. Sitting for long conversations, eating more than usual, and sleeping outside of my normal routine all affected my well-being. While I valued meaningful connections, I also had to listen to my body. At this age, I no longer had the same flexibility to adapt to unexpected changes in my daily habits. The fear of upsetting others had been keeping me in situations that were no longer serving me, and I knew it was time to make a change. Now, I've learned to set boundaries. When I visit someone, I make it clear from the start how long I plan to stay. If a host insists I stay longer, I simply smile and say, "Thank you, but I really must be going." At first, I worried that people would be offended, but to my surprise, most of them understood. I realized that my presence was enough. I didn't have to stretch my limits to prove my appreciation. Most importantly, I've come to understand that a meaningful visit doesn't have to be a long one. A short but heartfelt conversation, a few genuine moments of connection, is enough to maintain relationships without leaving me exhausted. And now, instead of feeling fear, I feel relief. Relief that I can honor my own needs without guilt, and that the people who truly matter will respect that choice. 6. The home is heaven realization. I used to thrive on lively conversations with friends and family. I could sit for hours discussing news, trends, and stories of everyday life, completely engaged and enjoying every moment. Social gatherings were something I looked forward to, a chance to exchange ideas, share laughter, and feel connected. But as I've grown older, I've realized that these conversations don't hold the same meaning for me anymore. What once fascinated me now feels foreign, and sometimes I find myself feeling lost in the middle of a discussion. At first, this realization was terrifying. I began to question myself. Was I losing touch with the world? Was I becoming irrelevant? The thought of not being able to relate to my loved ones anymore unsettled me. I worried that if I couldn't keep up with their conversations, they might stop including me altogether. I feared that my growing preference for silence meant I was slowly fading away from their lives. I remember one particular visit to my nephew's house. He was excitedly talking about the latest internet trends, new technology apps, and viral social media challenges. He went on and on about short video platforms, popular online content, and slang terms I had never heard before. I sat there, nodding politely, trying to listen, trying to understand. But the more he spoke, the more I realized I simply couldn't keep up. It felt like he was speaking a different language, one I had never learned. I smiled, pretending to follow along, but inside I felt an overwhelming sense of disconnect. A quiet panic crept in. Was this what aging felt like? A slow drifting away from the conversations that once felt natural? There were also times when I attended family gatherings, hoping for the warm, heartfelt conversations of the past. I longed for the familiar comfort of reminiscing about shared memories, discussing life's simple joys, or just sitting in contented silence with people I loved. But instead, I found myself surrounded by discussions about work stress, financial investments, and challenges I no longer related to. I felt like an outsider, a bystander in my own family. I tried to contribute, but my words felt hollow, as if I were forcing myself into conversations that no longer had a place for me. In those moments, I felt an ache deep in my chest, a fear that I was slowly becoming invisible. For a while, this fear consumed me. I began to dread social gatherings, worried that every conversation would remind me of how out of place I felt. The thought of sitting through another long discussion about topics that no longer interested me felt exhausting. I was afraid that if I stopped participating, I would be left behind. I clung to the belief that I had to make an effort to stay connected, even if it drained me. But then something changed. One evening, after another exhausting visit, I came home, sat down in my favorite chair, and simply let the silence wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt a deep sense of relief. There were no conversations to keep up with, no need to pretend I was engaged in discussions I didn't care about. Just the comforting quiet of my own home. I realized then that my fear of losing connection had blinded me to something important: peace. Over time, I came to understand that losing interest in certain conversations doesn't mean I've lost my connection with people. It simply means I have changed. My mind now craves deeper, slower conversations, ones filled with meaning rather than fleeting trends. I no longer feel the need to keep up with every new piece of technology or every passing social movement. Instead, I seek out discussions that nourish my soul, talks about life's experiences, personal reflections, and the simple joys of everyday moments. Now I choose the conversations I want to be part of. If a discussion makes me feel out of place or uncomfortable, I allow myself to step away without guilt. I no longer force myself to sit through conversations that exhaust me. Instead, I value quality over quantity, prioritizing relationships that bring me a sense of fulfillment. I seek out people who engage in meaningful discussions, those who truly listen and understand. Most importantly, I have learned that not every conversation is worth joining, and that's okay. Instead of forcing myself into discussions that don't bring me joy, I embrace moments of solitude where I can reflect, read a good book, or simply sit in quiet thought. And the best part? I no longer feel lonely because of it. The fear that once gripped me has faded, replaced by the comfort of knowing that I am at peace with the choices I make for myself. I am no longer afraid of silence. I welcome it. And in that silence, I have found a new kind of connection, the one I have with myself. Peace in my own choices. Looking back on my journey, I realized that stepping away from social gatherings is not a sign of isolation or disconnection, but rather a choice that brings peace. When I was younger, I believed that life was only meaningful when filled with relationships, social events, and countless stories to share. But at this stage of life, I understand that it's not the quantity but the quality of the moments we dedicate to ourselves that truly matters. I no longer feel pressured to visit everyone, engage in conversations that don't truly interest me, or maintain relationships out of fear of being forgotten. Instead, I embrace the quiet of my own company and devote my time to what truly brings me joy. A good book, a warm cup of tea, a peaceful afternoon in my garden, these simple moments now bring me more happiness than any crowded gathering ever could. I still cherish my family and genuine friendships, but I no longer feel the need to be everywhere to prove it. I've come to understand that connection is not measured by the number of visits, but by the sincerity in each moment shared. Most importantly, I have learned to love myself, to listen to my body and mind, and to choose only what truly brings me joy. If you are entering this stage of life, remember that prioritizing yourself is not selfish. It is a gift, a freedom that aging grants us, a peace that we fully deserve to embrace.